Yep.
I'm not sure that's the criteria, but I don't care.
That's what happened in my
with the driveway.
All righty.
Yeah, I can't figure out how
Okay, we're on the air.
fire engine gets around the first corner.
Okay.
One that's the extension.
Hi, welcome to the March 1st meeting of the Kennebunkport Planning Board. We are on both Zoom and live in person here. So the information on Zoom is out on the town website. So the first item is attendance, and we are all here except Larry, who is on vacation. And so we'll alternate you guys for voting. All right, so the first step is approval of minutes. So, everybody get a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and I guess you just issued a slight amended one to this morning, I think. So, have any motions here on the minutes?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as were amended by Trish.
Okay,
I'll second it.
all right. So let me just go down the line here.
Agree.
Agree.
Tom agrees?
Agreed.
Great, okay.
You get. You can.
Which brings us to our agenda. The first item is item 221003, the KJ Trudeau Properties, the Glen at Goose Rocks subdivision. Jason I'm sorry, Jason. Agent. You can pronounce your last name for me at the same time.
Good evening. My name is Lucian Langlois,
Yeah,
but Jason Vafiata is the primary engineer
Okay,
with Atlantic Resources.
all right.
The Glen at Goose Rocks is a 9-lot residential subdivision with the 10th lot being open space. The lot is about 43 acres in size. It's zoned in the Farm and Forest District, and there's a network of wetlands, 2 streams, and 2 non-significant vernal pools. The project is also being reviewed by Maine DEP and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The project does not propose to use any city utilities. There'll be individual wells and individual septic fields for each lot. Fire suppression will be through residential sprinklers. And this project does request the waiver of the road length for dead-end streets. The subdivision design utilizes 2 cul-de-sacs. The cul-de-sac requiring the waiver is 1,150 linear feet, with the limit being 1,000. And that, if you've seen previous versions of this project, it began as a loop road, and that loop road required a lot more wetland fill. And by going to this cul-de-sac design, we've reduced the amount of wetland fill. The project before you actually is just over 8,000 square feet of proposed wetland fill. The initial design submitted with preliminary subdivision was 10,000 or so square feet of wetland. So that's kind of the basic overview of the project. I understand we're opening tonight's for a public hearing, so I'm glad to field those questions.
Okay, well, my first question relates to the Acorn Engineering memorandum. Have you reviewed that?
We have, and we're still working on that. There's a lot of comments which require design changes that we're trying to line up with our design changes with the Maine DEP and Army Corps permits. We don't have a full official response to that, but anything that required a design change, we've jumped on that so that we can submit what we believe to be a final plan to DEP that includes all those comments. So still pending.
Okay. All right, now Larry is on vacation and is the case manager on this one, but I'll just go around to folks here and see what anyone has comments. You want to start, Nina?
I had a lot of comments, but if you're still working on the engineering report, I'll hold some of those. I noticed they mentioned that, I believe some of the house lot areas, some of the impervious areas and so forth, might impact the setbacks for streams. And I'm wondering if you're changing your design to avoid that?
So in this latest design, we have moved stuff away from stream setbacks, including wetlands. As far as the DEP's rules, the wetlands don't have a setback, but we're still treating them as they do and trying to stay away from them. So impervious areas, developed areas, any proposed development, including tree clearing, is being submitted to DEP as a permit by rule. So with their permit by rule process, they have jurisdiction of 75 feet from a stream. So anything that's being proposed in that setback is under their review, and there is stuff within 75 feet. Primarily, it is road crossings, but we do have a few stormwater structures and house lot development within that 75-foot area.
Okay. And I also noticed that there were a lot of discrepancies in the calculations of impervious areas, and I assume you're working on that.
We are working on that, yeah. There will be a stormwater management report that was submitted with the preliminary subdivision application. That will be revised, as well as the plan set will have a table on it that has all the impervious and developed numbers.
And also the the time of draining, basically, as they pointed out from the storm management areas.
Yeah, we're gonna reply to each question so that there's a question for each, an answer for each one, but most of that information will be compiled in the stormwater management report.
Okay. I had some questions on your, well, it's a draft HOA, so I just wanted to make some comments. Are you setting up, for example, when you say 7.13, no lot owner may clear vegetation or disturb land and so forth, are you setting up some sort of fine or way to deal with that if they do?
I haven't thought about that yet. If somebody was to violate the HOA bylaws, in turn, they would violate the approval by the board as well as DEP and the Army Corps permit. Any variation from plan, it would be a deviation and, a violation. We haven't thought of proposing any monetary penalties, but that's something that we can look into to make sure that, there is a deterrent for people doing that.
I think you ought to have that on 712, which it deals with the pesticides and herbicides as well as disturbing land beyond the limits. You also ought to make a suggestion, not a punishment for, but a suggestion that screens be kept on windows to prevent bird strikes, maybe citing the federal migratory bird law.
Within the HOA bylaws?
Within
for
the
that?
HOA,
Okay.
It's a suggestion. It's
Yeah.
not a requirement,
Yeah.
But I suggest that so that people are aware, that this helps keep down bird strikes, because you're in a wetlands area. It's one of my pet peeves, anyway. Being an attorney, I looked at your miscellaneous and your Article 9, and I'd also suggest that where you have 9.3 and the invalidity, the severability clause, as we call it, the provisions of the bylaws and so forth, you might include a sentence that if the invalid provision has been struck in lieu, you would try to include a provision that's rewritten in as similar terms as may be valid and enforceable. And if you go to your attorney, he'll have something on that. And also perhaps a paragraph that no amendment or waiver is valid unless it's written and signed by all parties.
Mm-hmm.
This is pretty similar in contract law. And that's all I had right now.
Okay. Ed?
Thanks. I was hoping you could help me fit together the paperwork that I received in the mail
Yes.
at the end of last week with the paperwork that we'd had before that. I don't think it's a complete replacement. It's not an entire new package. Is that correct?
It's not, this is supplemental information. We were probably 70%, as far as completing comments that came from Werner, and Michelle. And that was from the, preliminary subdivision, the initial review. So
If we could just go through.
Sure, yeah.
That stapled package and say what we should do with it. Like the first part of it, it seems like this is brand new. This is you answering questions that came from the code enforcement office, and I think I got that part.
Yep.
And then there's a cost estimate. Does that replace or go, is that one of the exhibits later?
we were missing that exhibit. So
So
what's,
what exhibit is that? Could we know that? So we know what to
to line that up with the preliminary
Oh, yeah, I want to
application?
line, that's what I'm trying to do,
Yes.
is merge these.
I understand. There is a financial and technical section. It's within a table of contents, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but that preliminary application did have a technical and financial capacity exhibit, and we pretty much had a statement talking about our company, as well as the applicant, Creative Coast Construction, and KJ Trudeau, and their extensive technical ability. So we're missing a cost estimate to go along with that.
So there is, as you say, a table of contents in the preliminary submission. Which one of the exhibits in there is the cost estimate, I guess is what I'm saying.
So the cost estimate would go into the section for financial and technical ability.
Exhibit 5, technical and
Exhibit
financial
5. Yep.
capacity.
Thank
So-
you, Ed.
So is this in its entirety, or is this add to something that's already in the preliminary?
That would be something to add to the preliminary, yes. So the revised application in its entirety would include that as a attachment to that section to
So
complete that
nothing in
section.
the current attachment changed? Just
Correct.
this gets added?
Correct, we were missing a cost estimate completely.
Okay, so add to Exhibit 5.
So generally, also what we wind up seeing, and it's not necessarily, we don't necessarily see it at the prelim, but it's common to see at the final. And it is certainly something that the town looks for, prior to the start of a project, is we're looking for the financial capacity, whether in terms of, if there's a bank that's going to issue a bond or letter of credit or whatever type of, financial security they are, they're proposing. And so that's something that, once a project goes through the planning board process, that the town reviews before a project gets started.
So to that point, I'm focused right now, just for the minute, on completeness of package or integration of packages. I think, Werner, are you saying to me that in addition, there's another piece of information you want in Exhibit 5? Or are you saying above and beyond this, there's something else?
So financial capacity is very often, we see a letter from a bank that says,
Right?
we've worked with X and
Yep.
financed many of their
we've seen 'em.
projects and are, will be providing, financial support for this project. Something like that, in terms shows that there are, there's the capacity, and funding, behind that. Because ultimately, once you go through an approval, you want to, want assurances that there's, that there's viability.
So I'm wondering, did are we asking the applicant, should we, as the board, ask the applicant to have that as part of the final submission?
That should be part of the final,
Yes.
it's not necessarily
It's not
needed.
here
Yeah,
right
it's
now.
not necessarily needed for the,
Right.
For the prelim.
Okay.
Because ultimately, a lot of times, you're looking at, as they're developing cost estimates, right? So you have a number, related to cost estimates, then, then we look to see how that then lines up with the, any financial capacity.
So my note to self here is also want a bank statement as part of final.
That's right. We ultimately look for that anyways. That's that's written into your subregs.
Right.
And what we, do with that, just so, and I think we've talked about this before, is that when it comes time for a project to start, ultimately, we look for numbers based on actual estimates and proposals. Often, so at this stage right now, you're getting an estimate.
You're saying similar tos or,
Well, oftentimes, what sometimes may get used in an engineering calc may be different than what the market, what the current market is. So you
for
might,
example, what we have here?
you might wind up seeing a cost estimate for, well, it's no different than like an insurance company maybe saying, well, here's what we estimate the replacement cost of your house is, right?
Rules of thumb.
That's right.
Yeah.
Rule of thumb is X. But then what you may wind up seeing is that the actual estimate from, contractor or builder is something different than,
All right.
than what may have been estimated. We base, then that final letter of credit or bond or whichever financial piece the developer's using on an actual estimate and not necessarily the, the numbers that are, that are provided here. This gets us a ballpark, that puts us in a neighborhood in terms of understanding that.
But as a comment.
Right.
Back to the applicant, we're saying we'll be looking for something a little more for the final.
Yeah.
If that's clear.
And that's part,
Or
yeah,
maybe
that's
maybe
part
it
of
was
the
always,
final.
always anticipated.
No, evidence
you're
or
not new to this.
documentation of financial capacity can be provided for financial, for final, and I believe it would be a bank letter.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
I also feel like I'm sort of, in Larry's absence here, I'm trying to ask questions that he might
Sure.
be interested
Yeah.
in. I don't want to be going on and on. This, let me just go through this, another 3 or 4 things in this package, the replacement package. The next thing is an application, and it looks to me like that probably totally replaces the pages, the similar pages that were in the preliminary, if I'm right. There's 4 pages?
Correct.
Is that right?
There were a few things on that application form that we talked about last
Yep.
time, and one of them was this parcel has been subdivided in the past 5 years, just once. So that's just to let the board know that it did not trigger subdivision yet until this proposed project, but there was a division. That was one of the corrections that we made, and I believe it was updating the amount of the linear length of road for the waiver, the cul-de-sac.
That's in there?
Those were the 2 big ones off the top of my head. It was really just to give you,
Had the map and lot mislabeled.
we had the map and lot mislabeled. The lot is
Yeah.
1B.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and you mentioned that in your cover letter here too, so those 4 pages changed. Then there's, again, a set of pages that are similar to, I'm not sure how they're different, but they're similar to a set of pages in the preliminary. Kennebunkport subdivision regs 415 7.2 submissions. And that's like 1, 2, 3, 4 pages of that. And is this a total replacement for that?
It is a total replacement because that provides updates showing that we are adhering to required submissions. In the past submittal, we were either lacking information or didn't have information for that. So that
You
kind
don't
of,
have one that's marked as to what's changed, do you? Just, we should just review it as a new document?
I do not have that tonight, no.
Okay. I'll have some questions on that in a minute,
Sure.
but let's just finish this. And then you gave us the draft HOA, which we asked for last time. Is that an exhibit, or is that new? I mean, it doesn't go in one of the table of contents folders?
That will be a new exhibit, and we're gonna need to make revisions for that. And
Probably
that-
Exhibit 18 then. Maybe? That would be the next one in order.
Yes,
Okay. And again, for the final, if this were an integrated package, that'd be sweet.
yes, yes. And I would like to ask, does it make sense for this next submittal to highlight everything that's been changed as a separate document, just to, or just kind of say this replaces everything?
I'm okay with starting anew on it.
Okay.
Given you've changed a lot, and you're gonna be changing some more, it sounds like, from the design point of view. Anybody else have a strong feeling about that?
No, but a new integrated package would be nice.
Yeah, the
Yes.
new integrated package would be
Would
great.
be important.
For sure.
But, I mean, clearly, we'd need that for the final. The question is, do we have to
Correct.
put
I
it?
think just for the final would be all Larry will look for, but what do you think?
Well, we have to write, I mean, if we're gonna approve it, I don't believe we're quite ready to approve this
no.
preliminary.
Right, so just, keep in mind, as you're working through prelim, really what you're then indicating to, to the applicant is that, they're ready to proceed to the next level, in terms of filing the final, and so, as you remember, and we remind folks that that letter doesn't indicate an approval of the project, but just indicates that, we've dealt with the majority of the issues and that, you're able to move on to the next, to the next step in the process.
Well, I agree with that, but we also have public hearings on the preliminary. And I think it's important that a document be clear enough and complete enough that people can read this, abutters can read it,
Without
residents
confusion.
can.
Sure, you're not going to 3 different places to find,
Exactly.
the answer to.
And the applicant doesn't
this
want to
question.
walk out
Yeah.
with the uncertainty that, gee, I hope that approval really is the approval of what I'm building, right? Says, oh, no, I thought this was in the other section, and no, that was the old piece, and you don't want that, so.
Exactly, and my intention of supplying the updated and supplemental information was so that the public did have that today for
Latest
the
and
meeting, so they
greatest,
had the
right.
latest and greatest information to comment on.
But it's hard to find it. It's hard. It would be nice if you had an integrated package and maybe just a letter highlighting the important changes.
Yeah.
So,
Significant.
Yeah,
Significant.
that makes sense,
For the
yeah.
preliminary.
I like that.
yeah, for the
okay.
preliminary.
That'll be easier for us, I know that. So Exhibit 18, we think, is going to be the HOA material.
Yes, that will be added for final.
And then the new soil test pit logs. Is that part of one of the existing, does that get added into one of the existing exhibits?
Yes, those will be added to the subsurface waste disposal, the wastewater section. That was a comment that was initiated by the Code Enforcement and Planning Office. We had some test pits that just didn't really fall in a location that made sense for lot lines and house development. So Longview Partners went out there and dug up some more test pits to show that we do have suitable locations and updated proposed septic
But in
systems.
the integrated package, where will they set? Where will these pages
Ed,
go?
I gotta make it clear to you, some of those test pits are meant for stormwater, design and evaluation. Those test pits may fall within the stormwater report. Other test pits were prepared for septic systems and wastewater disposal. Yet other test pits were performed for the high-intensity soil survey.
So I shouldn't be
Our
surprised that
intention-
I can't figure out where they go in the table of contents.
Ultimately, we have to have all the information submitted to you in a fashion so that you can understand which test pits went to which,
Okay.
which outcome.
My point is, we're not at that point. I thought maybe
Agreed.
with a simple questioning, we could get to that point. I think you're saying that's not gonna happen tonight. That's what I'm hearing you say. Don't bother.
We're attempting to provide the information in a fashion that you're comfortable with.
Thank you.
Very often, what we do is put all the test pits into one single spot in an application and let people find them on the map for whatever
All I'm
purpose
asking
they're
is
intended for.
where's it go in the table of contents?
Look,
Where is that single spot? I'm not faulting that concept. I just don't know where it goes in the integrated package. I'm
Obvious-
asking a simpler question than you're
Under soil
answering.
analysis.
It's
Maybe.
likely gonna be under soils.
well,
That's not what he said, but.
like
okay.
Jim said, these test pits were mostly for wastewater, but we do have some that will be for our new stormwater BMP
Okay,
structure. So
just-
it will be in
Just to
various.
not go on all night on this, can you, as part of this integrated package that you just agreed to provide for preliminary, put these in their proper spot? And
The integrated package will be a lot easier to read, and it will, I think, take care of a lot of this. And I do like the idea of having a letter that identifies the significant changes, just as a reminder.
That'd be sweet.
Super.
yeah. The next thing is the draft HOA bylaws. Would that go in, go with the HOA, the previous HOA materials, or is this another
The HOA bylaws, which have been recently submitted, replaces the previous draft. This draft incorporates the prohibition of pesticides, but also allowing for uses in only certain scenarios where there's invasive species to manage.
I don't think we had a previous one that this is replacing.
No, we didn't. There wasn't an HOA that I remember. This is a
There's-
new draft,
There's no
but
exhibit.
it's okay.
This is a new document you sent us.
It's okay.
Well, actually, it's just a cover page. Oh, so maybe it goes with the other.
No, it is in there.
There's a draft there.
Stapled in a different place, huh?
Here. Draft HOA bylaws.
Yeah.
Oh, Ed, there's like a sheet in there that was a
It was right
duplicate.
here.
No, that's earlier.
Right after the word draft, HOA bylaws.
Right here. Draft HOA bylaws.
Oh, I see. I have a second copy of that page. You don't have that?
There's a second.
I had just found that
Cover
today.
page.
There is a second cover page that is incorrectly labeled, and
Oh,
it does
okay.
say
All right.
draft.
So that'll just go away.
There's
No,
also
that's
Glenn
in
with
front
two
of
N.
the letter from the tribal historical.
Yep, it's the last exhibit in that,
Yeah.
in
So,
that
yeah,
package.
so that,
So the cover page is.
that cover page really has something to do with some other exhibit.
Yes, yes, it does.
And will that be a new exhibit, the tribal historic
Replace.
preservation?
That's historically answering the historical inquiry.
I'm
Right.
just asking where it goes in the
That was
document.
because of the way it was.
It usually goes at the end
Yeah.
or after the DEP permits, but it's
Yeah,
something that's required in the subregs.
No, I understand. I'm just saying it,
We've seen it before at the end of the submission.
I
It doesn't
feel like
have-
I'm repeating myself. I
But-
got a bunch of new information, some of it's replacement, some of it's new.
And they're gonna sort it all out for us.
Sounds like I don't need to ask any more about
You
that.
don't have to sort it out, they will.
While we're doing that, the last major thing that we got were a package that looks a lot like the site plans we had before.
Yes.
Okay. So if you could, when you're sorting this, the cover page of this has a sheet index, right? Has sheet index 1 of 10, 2 of 10, down to 10 of 10, right?
Yes.
There's 12 pages, just for clarity.
Yep.
And then the sheets themselves are not labeled 1 through 10 or 1 through 12. They're labeled sheet 1, there's a couple of those, and then sheet 100, 200, 300, et cetera. Could you please update these to tie the cover sheet, table of contents, to the actual page numbers that are on the pages, and set up a way that you can do a rev on them
Yep.
in the future?
We
Like
can
either by
certainly do that.
date or something like that?
Yep.
Okay, so we have 12 pages, and each one of them has a unique identifier.
Yep.
That would help a lot. In that site plan, I'm sorry, in that site plan, you answered one of the questions that was asked by including a table that
Yes.
shows the lot sizes and the density calculation. One of them's on the second sheet, 1. And, And then there's another one on the following page, C101. They're not the same. The numbers are different on them. One of them says there's 10 lots that could be done as a net density calculation. The other says 9.82. And I haven't gone through and checked all the math and everything, but only to say, probably just want one table that has the numbers.
There's
that-
definitely a discrepancy
you
there.
want.
Yep, that can be fixed.
Okay. on sheet one, the one that you call the plat plan, I think,
Yep.
is that right? Can you talk a little bit about the easements that are excluded by that table and who owns them?
So there's various forms of easements. There's easements for driveway access through one parcel to gain access to another, which avoids wetland impact. There's easements for the walking trails to access the open space. There's also easements for stormwater buffers, and each one of them constitutes a deduction in our net residential calculations. These easements will be maintained by the HOA.
Why would the driveway easements be deducted?
Excuse me, except for the driveway easement, which will go to the lot owner, the stormwater buffer easements and the walking trail easements will be dedicated to the HOA.
Okay, so maybe that's, as you reconcile those tables, that's something that could be sorted, because it looks like all the easements have been backed out.
Yeah, so that all the easements have to be backed out, whether they're for driveways or for stormwater buffers.
They all get deducted from that lot area,
I see.
but the administration and the oversight is different for those types of easements.
Right.
Maybe something in the project description can kind of take care of who's responsible and outline what the easements are. I don't know if there's really a section in the application for it, but at least the project description can kind of explain some of that.
All right.
Lucian, I would think probably in the HOA docs that there's gonna be some further, description in terms of, maybe the easements get labeled in terms of, these are the ones that are dedicated for, roadway maintenance and and the stormwater maintenance, and then, ultimately, that'll specifically exclude the one that is a private driveway easement, which that'll show up in the deed descriptions.
That's a good point, and I imagine once
That'd be a
we,
good way to do it. And again, I think, is Larry gonna be back next time? Do we expect him?
Yeah.
So I think, rather than try to do this twice, and if you can be ready with some of that line of questioning next meeting.
sure,
that would be
the
really
draft
helpful.
HOA needs an attorney's touch on it, obviously, and I think some of these
Right.
things that have been brought up can definitely be added by that attorney.
Yeah, some of them for sure, but the ones that talk about these technical aspects, I think you two guys will probably,
Oh, we'll be involved as well in that.
Much-
I'm
much more,
not to say that they're gonna do it on their own.
right, no.
You can describe the easement in the HOA, but easements are normally written into deeds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're gonna go with the deeds of each
Yeah.
individual lot.
So I was gonna ask you tonight, but I'm gonna defer this to the next meeting. I was gonna ask if you would take us through one lot. You pick a lot.
Sure.
One that's maybe got an easement and a stormwater treatment, and just blow that up, and we'll look at it and say, here's what's going on with this lot, and here's what the owner's gonna be responsible for. Here's what the HOA is gonna be responsible for. Here's a shared access.
Okay.
Here's how the open land has got to, and I don't think we should do that for all 9 lots or anything, but this is a very complex, I think I appreciate a little bit of how hard you've worked on this. There's a lot to it, and it would be helpful to us to understand that.
Sure, and that's something you wanna do tonight,
Maybe
or?
the next meeting,
Okay.
maybe the next meeting, if that makes sense? Yeah.
Okay.
One more, on open space, and this is a,
Can I make a suggestion? Would you choose lot 3, which has a great deal of stormwater and wetlands and.
I don't see why not. We can definitely do that. No problem.
I would like Werner's help on this. On the open space, you've got 15% open space on this.
As required by the ordinance, yep.
That's what I was gonna ask. Where does that come up in the ordinance? This is not a clustered zone. There's no,
Yeah, it's spelled out in the subregs.
any subdivision, I couldn't find it.
It's right in the beginning of the
Yep.
subregs.
Yes,
in the subregs.
it's in the subregs
If you could tell me the paragraph later, that'd be
later.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I can
No, I
give
don't
you
need
the,
it this
we can give you the
instant.
section,
Yeah.
yep.
Tom, I have more questions on the first 3 or 4 sheets that came in. There's only one that I would really absolutely want to look at tonight, and that has to do with the flood zone levels. On the general comments, your answer to the code office's questions about unnumbered A zone on the preliminary flood map may require creation of a new BFE. You come back and you say, for areas shown in Zone A, based on the preliminary mapping, we suggest a condition that any development within the yet unadopted flood zone A be required to submit a FEMA LOMA, which I don't know what that is, for a proposed structure. A study to determine the extent by elevation of the proposed flood zone A is forthcoming.
Would you like your surveyor to speak to this? Sure.
I don't see anything about flood zone A on any of the site plans that I could find. Can you help me with that? And then, what are we saying? We're gonna stick with the old maps?
That's, so what our comment is saying and what we're hoping, what we're suggesting.
Translate,
Is that the FEMA, LOMA, it's a letter of map amendment. So what we're suggesting is that as each home is built, and if they have a proposed structure, which is in the preliminary maps, which aren't in effect today, they're anticipated that they'll be approved in fall of 2023, but they've been appealed quite a bit, so we don't know that for a fact. But if one of these lots proposes a structure within this updated floodplain, that person will have to receive a letter of map amendment through FEMA. It's an application process. And
Do
each-
you have something, though, that shows where Zone A lays on these site plans?
So the site plans depict the flood map which is in effect today, and that is the flood zone B. Flood zone A is not depicted on this map. Werner has suggested obtaining a base flood elevation as part of determining where that is. That work has not been completed.
And when is that anticipated?
It sounds like the board does not like this suggestion that we've proposed, which is fine.
Well, I
I'm
don't
trying to-
understand it, quite honestly, and I thought that, maybe I wasn't clear. You're not building the homes. Is that what you're saying?
No, John is gonna build the homes. John Trudeau will build individual homes. Ed, just like, Apple Blossom
But you're
Lane-
willing to assume the risk that you
No,
won't
no,
be
no,
able
no,
to build
no,
on these
no,
lots?
No, you missed the point.
I
The
have.
LOMA, the requirement for the LOMA, as a condition of an approval, which you board can set, has every individual homeowner, buyer of the lot, John Trudeau, the builder of the house, going for that correction of survey elevation for each proposed specific house location prepared by a land surveyor. I have our land surveyor with us
I got
tonight.
that.
If further questions exist regarding the process of the LOMA, it's commonly done, if you bear with me a minute, Ed. One of our earlier meetings, we referred to this exact issue with respect to Apple Blossom Lane, which is across the way, in which we created 2 additional lots within John's old subdivision for Apple Blossom Lane, both of which of those 2 lots were in this same unnumbered flood zone, and both of which required the LOMA sign off in order for those houses to be safely built. So it is possible that the board, because these are unknowns, because we don't have an approved map for what is going to be in the future allowed. And we are in this indistinct zone. And for the surveyor to lay a baseline across a whole 44-acre lot to determine it in advance for specific house locations, it's premature because we don't have specific locations. We've got representative locations on each lot, but that's a specific process that the LOMA involves that's specific to the final chosen house location, and it's premature to do it now without knowing that. In the fashion that Apple Blossom Lane got approved and addressed the issue of LOMA and the unmapped flood zones, that's what Lucian is making a request for the board, that same consideration that we had for Apple Blossom lots. And Werner may elaborate on that for us, that process.
So what
Can
is
I
the
just,
trigger?
can I just finish my question? I think you've misunderstood my question. Why not? Don't we have a map that says where Zone A
No,
would be
no.
in
that's
this
the point.
area?
Oh, well, we have a projection of it, yes.
Yes, why wouldn't we take that projection and look at where it lays on here to assess the degree of risk we're talking about? Maybe some of these lots are entirely covered by the envisioned flood, map A.
And
Maybe others are not.
And then
Let's
there's a way
take a
to-
look at it. That seems to be prudent.
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to that.
Okay.
I can tell you that, so, the Zone B that's depicted on here is very broad. The unnumbered A zones, so, and just a little bit of a history in terms of flood map development. So the Zone B that you see on these maps was, developed back in, I'm gonna say either the 70s or the 80s. Whenever these things first showed up, they showed up on, effective maps dated from the 80s. And so some of these were not necessarily done with the benefit of, the technology that we have today.
Yeah.
Right, and keeping in mind also, these areas didn't have the benefit of what's referred to as a detailed study, okay? And so the detailed study that we see now and it's primarily more in the coastal areas, has an actual base flood elevation number. And so, and really what that's saying is that, the study is saying that this area has a 1% annual chance of flooding to this elevation. And so, as a result, certain elements of the building have to be X number of feet above that elevation, okay? So that's really what that is. So, unnumbered B zones, developed on maps from the 80s whenever, and to be fair, the contours that were used for those were USGS contours that were, 10 to 20 foot contour intervals. So, I've seen these, in these older maps, I've seen flood zones run uphill, on these, on these old paper maps.
Okay?
They weren't done in a digital world, so to speak. So fast forward to now, whenever the town first received, what I'll call the D firms, the digital preliminary flood maps, what occurred was that FEMA had primarily done just the areas that were going to be numbered. And so the numbered zones, so the higher risk zones,
Okay.
which are primarily your coastal areas, the rivers, things like that.
Not this zone.
But, right, so the inland, the unnumbered A's, there was this merge of the old data off the paper maps in with this digital, with this new digital product. And I can tell you, it was, I'm being polite by calling it a hot mess.
Yeah.
in that.
Wasn't usable.
It wasn't useful.
Yeah.
So many communities, Kennebunkport being one of them, actually commissioned an engineering firm to redefine and redevelop the unnumbered A zones. And so now, while they don't have the weight of a numbered A zone, there was there was modeling that was done. The delineation of these A zones, they used the LiDAR data, that was used to generate the contours that you see on our GIS maps. And so we wound up with, instead of these large swaths, we now have a product that is, that fits much better to the contours, on the face of the earth there. And still, displays in what we think is a much more accurate representation of areas that are subject to a flooding risk. So what that means now, so now we're in this odd stage where we've had, preliminary maps for a period of time, and we are inching slowly closer and closer to, getting to the point where the maps can be adopted. The issue of communities that have contested some of these maps has nothing to do with the inland A zones. has everything to do with the coastal analyses, that FEMA had done. And to that point, when newer versions of the maps were developed, we actually provided FEMA with the data that we had commissioned for the unnumbered days and said, please incorporate this into into the future updates of the maps, which they did.
You're making me think that they're at the point where they can be some value.
They are.
Now, they are useful now.
They are useful. Now, FEMA will tell you that, communities, we're obligated to use the best available data that we have when making land use decisions, okay?
Yeah.
Which sounds great and wonderful, but when it's not regulatory, it's pretty tough to hold somebody's feet to the fire, on something that's in a preliminary format, What we've done as a matter of practice is that we make sure that we inform folks whenever they have development that is going to occur in an area, that is subject to revised flood maps. We provide them what we classify as best available data. This is better than what you have on the old maps, hands down. It's better data. In many cases, because it's not regulatory, the property owner still has a choice on whether or not to develop their project based on data that we know will be forthcoming versus here's the regulatory piece of paper that is on the books today. Now, what ultimately I know what we may see with projects like this, and we'll see this with numerous others, is that when it comes time for flood insurance policies to be issued, those get reviewed by, in many cases, you got these outside third parties that review, they'll review a project.
Yeah.
And this was the case with Apple Blossom, is that, the homes, they weren't even identified as being in. They were somewhat adjacent to the areas that were flood zones. And the bank at that point required all this additional information. And essentially, you have projects that, at least in the financial stage, come to a bit of a pause where, the bank wants some assurance that the house that has been constructed is compliant with a floodplain reg. Now, in the case of Apple Blossom, when we looked at those, in my opinion, it was very clear that these houses were outside of those zones. I mean, they weren't anywhere remotely close, and we knew from looking at our local LiDAR and the contours that there was no issue here.
Yep.
But it's not our job to convince the bank, to loan money or to the insurance company to issue a flood policy. That's not our position. We just look at it and make sure that, it's compliant with the town's, with the town standards. Now, I flagged this particular question because, when you start seeing, and there's nothing incorrect about it, but when you start seeing flood zones that start to cross into building envelopes, you remember saying, hey, we dealt with this once before. And in this scenario, these building envelopes are closer, the elevations are flatter. It's not as distinct as what happened over on Apple Blossom. So hence this is more
And a significant investment in stormwater treatment here too.
This is more of your property owners are going to be dealing with this. And it behooves you all to develop a base flood elevation, that has been reviewed, that's been accepted, that's been designed. And that's, for unnumbered A zones, it spells out numerous ways that a community can develop base flood elevations for those unnumbered A's. They just don't have the benefit of a detailed study. Essentially, you have between a surveyor and your stormwater engineer can do the study to develop that elevation.
So my understanding was that the developer is going to be building the houses and then selling them. Am I correct there?
That's correct. He'll do
Okay.
the road, the stormwater infrastructure,
Okay.
everything and sell the houses.
So the
as built.
property owner will probably have to deal with this when they come in to buy and get a mortgage. That's when they'll be dealing with it at that point in time?
Well, and, here's the question is that, and this is, more just, us looking at past experience, where there have been questions about what the flood elevations are, is that it's recommended that you resolve and deal with that issue up front before you start the construction.
That's
you
what
know,
I thought.
So that you don't wind up in a situation where you're in this never-ending world of a construction loan, unable to get out of a construction loan scenario. The other issue that you potentially wind up with is that if it's determined that something was done incorrectly, okay, and so if FEMA determines that there's a potential violation of the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, then, that winds up being an issue then for the town. Now, too many strikes or violations of the NFIP, and it calls into question the community's eligibility to participate in the program as a whole. So, now, we've had one or two issues over the course of many years, very minimal, and most of them have been due to map discrepancies.
Okay.
But
Can we just go back to my concern here?
I-
There's a lot of information for me to take in, but, and I wasn't willing yet to go to say you are obligated to build to maps that aren't yet in force, even though it looks like they're coming, but we know that might slip out a little bit. But we do want to look at the best information available. And what I'm reading here is, you don't want to look at the best information available until later. And I'm uncomfortable with that.
Okay.
Just to make a point,
Jim, could you introduce yourself?
yeah, I'm sorry,
You-
I'm Jim Logan, I'm the wetland and soil scientist on this project. I've been involved with this since before John bought it. I'm gonna refrain.
I hear the concern, Ed. We're showing Zone B. Zone A is what's forecasted, but it hasn't been implemented yet.
Put it
but
on a
it's-
separate, put it
it-
on a separate view even,
it is-
just so we can get a
just-
glimmer of.
And just so
maybe-
everyone understands, it is a bigger flood zone. You can look at it on the
Yeah.
town of Kennebunkport's GIS. It is visible, but what we can't show you right now today is where it falls in relation to the project, and that's what you'd like to see, so I understand.
Is that something we can help with, or is that hard to do, to map it onto the project?
Oh, we'll take care of that.
yeah,
We'll do
that's
that
data
piece.
that's available.
We'll do that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can tell you, just generally speaking, it's actually much smaller.
The A is gonna be within the B.
That's right. Yeah, the A.
It's a different configuration. It
It's a
goes up
different
higher.
configuration, and it's somewhat in the same, general location, but in terms of land area, it's significantly less.
Yeah.
So right now, we're showing the B, right?
Correct.
Yes.
So what we will have will be inside that envelope,
That's what I'm hearing,
yeah,
yeah.
which should be better.
Well,
If they're meeting B
It's,
with it
they're
B
not
in it,
meeting B. I mean, to the
Well,
way
I-
you want,
well,
gonna have to meet A.
we are meeting B. We're not proposing anything within the current flood zone, but the flood zone A will be smaller. It's within B, but it's longer. It's just a different configuration. So even though it's within B, it also goes places where,
Let's just take a look.
yeah, we'll show you it.
So here's the other piece of it, is that understand that there is a distinct difference between a B zone and an A zone. And so the distinct difference between
gonna learn.
a B zone is that you're not required to develop a base flood elevation for a B zone. Because that's what the old terminology was, that's the 500-year floodplain. Okay?
The B is.
The B is. So the A is a 100-year flood zone. So there's a difference. So A zones are, even though the area is smaller, the zone classification is a more severe one.
It's gonna be more
Right.
depressed areas.
Well,
It has a higher frequency of flooding
And-
over a
Right.
duration.
High likelihood of flooding.
so you think of a 500 year as a 0.2 of 1% annual chance of flooding, and that's a bizarre number. The A zone is a 1% annual chance. I think I got my numbers right. I don't know.
Sounds
Yep.
right.
And we know,
I never went past geometry, so.
just because you had it last year doesn't mean you get another 99 years for free.
Yeah.
Every year, you
Yeah.
get that same chance.
So, yeah, so the zone, the severity of it is different, even though it's physically smaller.
Okay, but we won't have something that's basically approved to look at. We're just going to have something that's projected based on the best of our knowledge. I'm not so worried about it simply because the developer is going to take it very seriously because they're going to be in the middle of loans and stuff and selling a house to somebody in the bank.
You wait till Larry gets
It is,
there.
it is,
No, Larry
Thank
would
you,
say the
thank
same
you,
thing.
Nina. Nina, that's the
Yeah.
point I was
Yeah.
going towards at the
I
time. and
mean,
didn't
just
want-
you're
look-
not
let's
going to
just
be
look
able
at
to
it.
sell it if the
Correct.
bank won't give them a
I
mortgage.
didn't want to seem
so-
adversarial,
Yeah.
but if it's a Zone B, it'll only affect the cost of the insurance. It won't prohibit a house from being
Right.
built.
and even the Zone A doesn't
That's
prohibit,
the consequence
the
of it.
Zone A
And
doesn't
I
prohibit
don't
the
think that-
house.
I don't think this board needs to get overly concerned about the ramification of the construction of a house in that spot. It's gonna be up to the developer and the buyer of the home to get the right insurance for whatever house is built. And ensure that the height of the house is right for the zone.
Jim, you may be misreading the level of concern. I think there's a difference between us being overly concerned and being concerned at all. And if what you're saying is we shouldn't be concerned at all, then I'll disagree with
The
you.
point was, we were attempting at first to defer the information. As we had with the Apple Blossom project, I'm being compelled to believe we'll do it a different way for this project.
Thank you.
The issue winds up being is that, for example, with Apple Blossom, we were questioned as to why we didn't have the developer create a base flood elevation for that flood zone.
Yep.
And I can tell you that, my response to that was, well, the building envelopes weren't anywhere remotely close, at that point,
not
to
the
it.
case.
And it was, and it was unnecessary, in that regard. However, it still didn't change the fact that the owners still had to go through, a LOMR process, because that was something that the bank required. This is just, because we have these unnumbered A's that are, that are located within, the lots in that sense, it just behooves to get that elevation, and from a practical perspective here, just needs to be on the final plan. You just have to have those elevations determined as part of, as part of the final for something that gets, ultimately, that gets recorded.
Ultimately, the building permit is gonna have an elevation on it, and it's gotta be at the right one, right? So they're not gonna
Yep.
get a building permit to build unless they satisfy it. So he may end up at worst with a lot that he can't build on.
This deals with police.
Yeah, which is unlikely.
Yeah.
Because of that factor, that's it's an unlikely scenario.
Yeah, instead of sitting here, it may have to sit here, or they may have to bring the,
We're talking about, whether or not there has to be a flood vent, whether or not there has to be flood vents in a crawl space, or whether they choose to do,
It's mapped a certain
instead do stem wall, do a stem
that all
wall.
sounds to me like permit type issues.
That's right.
Versus us.
That's primarily where those issues are dealt with.
Just as a practical comment here, the board is, clearly there's mapping that shows flood information, and it is a primary concern to the board. All of these build sites, as we show them on the plan and the location that the houses are, relative to the stream that is on this property, I think the lowest one is about 6 feet above the elevation of the stream. That stream's not gonna flood 6 feet vertically, ever. It's not gonna happen. So, rest assured, we'll get the survey information to you. Rest assured, the house sites are safe, and we can provide that information.
That'd be awesome.
6 to 8 feet of elevation change based on the LiDAR that's on your plans not likely to affect those house sites negatively.
Not from the stream, yeah.
Thank you. That's all I'm going to ask. Thank you.
The fire chief's approval of the road, I didn't see that. Or did I miss it?
I was under the understanding that we would receive a memo from each department head, and that included the fire chief, and I haven't seen a memo yet. Am I?
We'll follow up on that. I believe that was done, but if you didn't see that, we'll follow up with you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I don't have an answer, I'm sorry.
George?
I have no questions to add. I look forward to a more coherent package.
Yeah, my intention was to just add a little bit more information from what was missing last time, not to confuse things, and I apologize for how much confusion it has made.
I'll let you guys find the typo on Glenn.
Anyway. So Mike, do you have anything?
I have no more. I'm gonna go back and look for that.
It's on the HOA, it's got 2 N's, it's spell check.
Excellent.
That's it for me.
I'm done.
You done?
I'm done, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I guess we should open the public hearing at this point. And so if any members of the public would like to be heard on the Glen at Goose Rocks preliminary sub, please come up and identify yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Eileen Lang, and I happen to be the abutter that, on both sides. So I will be surrounded by 3 roads. And my questions are about that road. First off, my request would be that I would be at least get a buffer, some sort of buffer for this big cul-de-sac that is going right towards my house. It's a very big cul-de-sac, very big. Something with some shrubbery, something that would be able to keep the lights out of would be great. My big concern with this piece of property, which obviously you're all addressing, and I'll make this very quick, this is such a wet piece of property. I've been there for 33 years. It is so flippin' wet. And I did read Acorn's recommendations, and their questions about some of these lots. I can't even believe they're getting a house on it. I can hear in my future sump pumps running all the time. And they do not know how much water is going to build up on this piece, because there's a great deal. And just after that last storm where the trees came down and everything, just walking around this town, Goose Rocks Beach, their homes look like they were sitting in swimming pools. So there's a tremendous amount of water in there. They were just pumping the water out into the road. The roads turned into sheer ice, so they were impassable for walking, and God knows about driving. But as an abutter, one of the pieces that was stated, which I don't really remember, I think it might have been the 8th parcel, that the runoff of the water was onto the setback. Well, now we're talking about my property getting wet. My property is already wet. Moose Rocks Road, I can attest, for when that road went in, there was no road. I know Mr. Logan had a lot to say about it, how bad it is, and it is bad. There was no road there. We had a logging road, basically. And now, since it's built up, the flooding that is on my property, the wetlands has standing water at all times. Trees are coming down at all times. It is just so wet. I had a fire on my property recently from actually your piece in front, where a tree had come down because it was so wet, and it blew into the transformer of the light, what do you call it, the electric
CMP.
post, and I wound up with it turning into a fire, which caught onto my fence, which was, I swear, every time I turn around, I'm fixing something because of floodwaters. So I'm saying this with all sincerity, I am blown away. I'm not against real estate development, truly, Jonathan.
Oh, no, I'm
I'm
not
not.
Jonathan.
I'm
I know,
not.
I'm somebody else.
But,
No, I'm not Jonathan Trudeau, I'm Jeff Ballard.
oh my God, Jeff, I didn't even recognize you.
Good to see you.
Oh my
How
God,
are
I
you?
hope that you Jonathan.
No, I know. We both good.
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
Don't put the
Jeff
camera
and
on
I,
that.
Jeff and I were on the affordable housing together. I'm embarrassed.
Don't worry about it, don't worry about it.
Any whoozle. Now I lost my gist of where I was.
Floodwaters.
Oh, well, if nothing else, I'm entertaining. Anyway,
You were on floodwaters.
thank you. The floodwaters are really intense over there. There's no place for it to go and it sits. And I know when you're going out, I am 400 feet off of Goose Rocks Road on the Moose Rocks Road, which I abut the entire line going up the front, well, to the back of that property and up to the side. That water sits along the road because it's no place to go. So on both sides of that property, with Jonathan's being on one side and Tim Cook's on the other side, it is just, the water goes over the road constantly. There's just no place, this water just sits there. There's a vernal pool, there is forested wetlands, I just can't even imagine to hear that there's gonna be gravel wetlands now. They're gonna be gravelled over in places. I mean, water has to go someplace, and we are in climate change. So I guess that's all, I'll beat the drum on that issue.
Well, I think I can answer one of your questions, but not on the floodwaters, okay? I think the cul-de-sac that you're talking about is the one the first one that comes into the left from Goose Rocks Road.
Could you say that again, please?
I think the cul-de-sac you're talking about, the big cul-de-sac, is the one that comes in, Jim can point to it right there.
Yes.
Okay,
My
well,
house is right here.
yeah, well, one of the things that's going to happen around there is undeveloped, that strip of land is going to be undeveloped. And so you'll probably have trees and shrubs in there that will probably hide that cul-de-sac.
I think that cul-de-sac is about 300 feet or so to the edge, from where the edge of.
We need a microphone.
Yeah.
It scales about 300 feet to the
About
edge of
300 feet.
to the edge of the cul-de-sac?
You also, you might consider planting some shrubbery around it and places where it would hide the view.
And the other thing is that there will be no roads, as she suggested, surrounding her house, because we're not going around her house with any roads, just the Moose Rocks Road. And the dead end of the cul-de-sac will be the nearest thing.
Here's my property, road, there's another road, this road going up there. And I'm curious, there's two roads, I'm on the side and I'm on the front. But there's another thing, I'm curious, your first, before your preliminary, your first drawings that you had, actually, to me, the one that was a horseshoe shape, made more sense because you were going in and out without less, I know that you're going over a lot of I think you were near the streams, I'm not quite sure. I'm having a hard time figuring out what your plans are showing. But I don't know if you went over the streams or not, but I know that you needed very big culverts there. Now you've divided it up in a different way, where you're going to have all these drivement easements that are like spiders, and you don't have the same regulations for the driveways as opposed to the actual paved road. It made more sense to keep the density of the paving together, and perhaps in the interior of it, a water collection area, than spreading it out through such a larger area with these easements going other pieces of property, and they're long driveways. I mean, I'm guessing, because I'm really having a hard time reading your, just saying. I'm kind of like looking at it on my phone.
Our response to the board's comments early on about the initial layout and that loop were taken very much to heart in developing this alignment, which did reduce wetland impacts and reduce the amount of impervious surface that could in fact increase runoff in the fashion that you're concerned. So this was an attempt to recognize comments the board made to us early on about earlier layouts that they found to be less acceptable. And we felt that this was a move in the right direction, having taken their comments very carefully into consideration. From the technical standpoint, Lucian mentioned how in an earlier array, we had closer to 10,000 square feet of wetland impact. We are now down around 8,000 square feet. So in the spirit and the intent of the DEP standards, we are avoiding and minimizing to the extent possible, hence this current plan. So we hope we're going in the right direction.
Okay. And I guess the last that I need to say is that I would probably like to introduce Elaine Lewin, who's at Black Rock Farm. And when you were talking about the HOA and the herbicides, the pesticides, using Roundup is an awful product. An awful product. It's a carcinogen.
Well, they've said in their document that they're going to prohibit that.
Did you? I guess I'm deafer than a doornail. I'm sorry. I apologize, but we heard that, and
It's
it's
in-
hurtful.
All the herbicides, one of the things they say is that these invasives don't run very
Okay.
fast. I mean, there are some other ways.
Ma'am, we can't hear you. You need to go to the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
And identify yourself, please.
I'm Helene Lewand, and I'm on the Goose Rocks Road. I'm actually here for the next part. This will be done. But, and primarily talking about the herbicides, which I've run Black Rock now for 40 years. I've never used an herbicide ever. It's 100% organic, almost. There are some fertilizers we use in the greenhouse. I don't have a problem. I have not much of a problem with pests at my place. And whenever I see one of these developments go in, I begin to worry about the groundwater. How much groundwater is there at this? Sounds like, I mean, I'm new to this. Sounds like a lot. And any herbicides going into that ends up someplace else.
Okay, the statement you made about Roundup being carcinogenic is not correct.
Well, I
It
didn't
is
say
not
that,
correct.
but-
It is not correct. There are some studies that show to applicators, it could be, who use it all the time, it could be carcinogenic. But despite juries which sympathize a lot, with people who have cancer, there has never really been a study shown that applying Roundup is generally carcinogenic. Never.
And it's interesting to hear, because so many other countries have.
It does,
have
however.
outlawed it.
Well, Europe is crazy that way.
Oh.
But, I worked with herbicides, okay? I worked with them for many years. And I like to keep it reduced to, on my property, to as little as possible of any herbicide. I'm not completely organic, I won't be. But, I apply where I need to only, and that's it.
Yeah.
Roundup, however, can get into water systems and cause other problems, and these are wetlands. You don't want to use Roundup there. You don't want to use anything that can move through the soil, okay? It gets in the streams, it eventually ends up in your oceans, it affects fisheries.
Yes, it does.
Where, this is the reason that I suggested that in a site like this, you don't use any pesticides, herbicides, okay?
I heard the pesticide part,
Right,
but about this, I
And
didn't
they've
read
got
it.
that in section
They've got it
7
in
of
the
the
HOA.
They've
HOA.
got it in the HOA.
Okay.
And what I was suggesting earlier on is they have some sort of detriment if somebody does use it, but allow, if it needs a spot treatment or something, if you've got an invasive in there or something like that, they allow that spot treatment.
And I just want to say to you, because I understand what you're saying, and many people have spoken, because I also do quite a bit of landscaping, so I have this discussion with people a lot. And I guess I just urge people to go into Ace Hardware or anywhere else they want to and see the row after row after row of herbicides, of fertilizers, and the fact that you can't trust people to be responsible. If people did use IPM, Integrated Pest Management, on their properties in the town and they meant it, they really used it, I would say, okay, save that oak tree, because that oak tree houses so many insects and so many good things for the environment, go ahead. But that's not the way it works. They kind of grin a bit at an IPA approach, and then they go ahead and go after it with the big guns. And we put so many chemicals out there, it's amazing.
Well, you better talk to a lot of the other landscapers, because they're the ones that promote these chemicals. And the
Okay, yeah, we're really
Sorry,
far
getting
off.
off topic.
Way off
I know.
topic.
Way
I
off
know.
topic. And
So-
it does say in the
Thank
HOA,
you.
they can't use them here.
Okay.
Jim, I had a clarification question.
Since my,
Oh, sorry.
since we all have such small envelopes over there to stick a house,
Who does? I'd like to speak to, just, we're talking about 44 acres of land,
of 9 homes.
9 homes that sit on 27 acres of net residential upland area. I came from a seminar yesterday in Brewer, where across the rest of the state, nobody can believe that a single-family home, one, can eat up 3 acres of upland. That seems ludicrous to other towns, because that defines suburban sprawl. I'm not saying it's not the way it should be done. It's the way we've traditionally done it in this town for years. I'm just saying, with 3 acres of net lot area and decent areas of contiguous upland, there's plenty of room to site a single-family home and a driveway and a septic.
I've lost the bubble here. This is a public forum. I'm not sure what the point is and what your counterpoint is anymore. Can you let the person who's at the podium speak, please?
I thank you. I appreciate that.
Please.
Lot number 3, according to Acorn, they couldn't even really determine where a house would fit because there wasn't enough space for even a yard. And that they would be over the forested wetlands and they would also be encroaching on the wetlands themselves.
So we're expecting,
that in
we're
Acorn.
expecting their response to
So-
the Acorn study. They said they haven't got it yet. I'm going to ask them afterwards when they do anticipate having it, but at this point,
Was the
we,
board going to request, and I don't mean to interrupt, are they going to request them to see this project through? I said that at the very end of it, they said that they were willing to do that.
we haven't got their responses yet. Let's go after that.
Okay.
All right,
So my concerns are with the wells and the septics,
understood,
okay? 'Cause I'm
Concur.
right there on the line.
of course.
Yep.
Yep, and if I understood, I can summarize your major concern up front was you want to know where the water's going to go.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Okay.
Thank you.
thank you.
Could I ask a point of clarification from Jim?
Please.
Jim, you'd said that the cul-de-sac was 300 feet from the edge. Did you mean from the edge or from her house?
300 feet to the edge of her, to the sort of the roof line edge of her house.
Roof
I have an
line
air,
for
I have
house,
an air
okay, not the
photo.
property.
Yeah, it's,
Thank you.
her house is not depicted on the subdivision
I
plan because it's
understand that.
off the lot.
I understand.
For the purpose of the discussion, I thought I would explain by picking.
Jim, thank you. I
You're
just
good.
thought you meant the edge of the property. Nope. Got it.
Okay.
People online.
Yeah, do we have any hands raised for public hearing?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest we need to defer the public hearing to the next meeting.
Continue it. Yep.
Yeah.
And,
Do you need a motion?
we took a motion for that usually, so let's,
I'll make a motion that we continue the public hearing until the next time, until we have a fuller report, more complete report.
I'll second that.
okay.
And have the answers. I don't want to close the public hearing until we have the answers to the Acorn study.
Right.
Excuse me? Yeah.
Well, let's wait until we see what we have next time. If all the answers are there.
Yeah, if they give us the stuff sorted together with the answers also, that'll be wonderful.
So I second the motion to defer the
Okay,
public
so
meeting.
You're in favor, Ed's in favor, Nina,
I'm in favor.
Tom,
Favor.
favor.
I get to vote.
Okay, so we will see you next time if you have everything, and that's, we'll finish the public hearing and see if we agree you should move on to the final subdivision plan.
Tom, to clarify, are you asking for us to respond to Acorn's comments and provide them to the town prior to this continued hearing?
Yes.
Is that what?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're looking for a more integrated report, more complete reports, something that we can look at as a whole with those
Sure.
answers and to approve or not approve.
There was a lot of comments in there, so we didn't finish the written comments. I had hoped to show that we had tackled a lot of them with our revised site plan, but we'll make sure to provide written comments to all of them.
Thank you.
It's clear you're making progress.
Yeah.
It's clear they asked a
It
lot
may
of
seem
questions.
jumbled, but we really are.
All right, well.
Thank you.
Thank you, board members. Appreciate the consideration.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the next item, which I don't have the number to, but anyway. To 221-202 Mills Road subdivision. So, I guess we have Mike and we have Jeff Bowley here, okay?
Hi there.
Okay, identify yourself as
Sure.
always.
Yeah, Mike Tadema Whelan, civil engineer with Teradyne Consultants. I'm here with Jeff Bowley, who is not the applicant for this project, but is consulting for the owner, who's also the applicant, and I believe he's on Zoom. And the applicant is Fang Farms LLC, represented by Patrick Dooling. So last time we were here, I think it was a couple weeks ago, we began the public hearing. We were still waiting on peer review comments from Acorn. I just received them today, so needless to say, I haven't had a whole heck of a lot of time to go through them, but I have reviewed them, and I guess my general characterization of them are there are some technical comments that I think we can, that are really more questions related to how some of the data is presented in the stormwater management report. I think we can respond to those pretty quickly, and I don't really have any concerns with the questions or the comments that were asked. I don't think it's going to change any of the conclusions of the report. I'm happy to answer any questions from the board if any of the comments, stuck out to any of you in particular. And I think we can quickly respond to them. Again, I don't see any of them as a major concern that's going to change any of the design.
Well, Mike, you want to kick this off for us?
I mean, for me, the biggest, seeing your response to these was really where I was, and if, getting that, having you do it on the fly versus do it for the next meeting, I'm not sure there's a huge benefit versus seeing you go through.
Okay. Well, anyone else? I mean, obviously, we will need a response to the Acorn, but we can continue the public hearing to next time if that makes the most sense.
It makes sense to me because there are a lot of discrepancies pointed out, and I'd
It's
like
this
to.
not numbered right or this labeled differently.
Yeah.
But that seems like
I think it's
fair
more
amount of
questions, in fairness.
housekeeping.
Yeah.
I-
Those are clerical in nature as opposed to, large technical discrepancies. Again, I would agree with Mike that didn't necessarily see anything that said that this is a big issue here, but
Yeah,
it's certainly up to the board.
Yeah, I will voice, I'd be remiss if I didn't voice sort of frustration of the applicant that we were here 2 weeks ago for a public hearing. It's been continued. We never received these comments, and now we have, and we show up and wait an hour and just kicked to the next meeting. But I understand that's the
Right, 'cause
process.
so you still don't have some of the wetland approvals Yeah, you're still waiting on that?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, so DEP, Army Corps,
Yep.
approvals will happen prior to final approval, so.
prior to the final.
We're under the, we have the belief that we have a design here that meets all the standards and is ready for preliminary approval. Respectfully, I understand the board wants to see,
Yeah.
responses to peer review comments.
Well, sometimes it takes a while for Acorn Engineering to get back. You know, they can be very busy, and
How could
it's
it be done better?
No,
It's,
I can speak to that piece, so,
It's a good
so,
comment, it's a fair
you know,
comment.
the information came in, and it was passed along with the direction that it was to be passed on to the board and to the applicant.
Yeah.
The applicant piece was missed until today, and so that falls back to us as a department. But the board did receive those comments when they came in.
right. But the board can't really do anything with them until the applicant responds. And it is unfortunate, but I think it would be best to just not waste any more time here hemming and hawing around this and having you come up with, well,
the
it's
only other-
probably this,
is
and
it,
but
we could have
coming back
reached out,
next time.
perhaps we could have reached out and said, oh, gosh, we're only getting these today. Maybe we could have had a conversation that would have precluded you coming all the way in and, like I say, sitting for an hour
I
and
think so
listening to
too,
that
yeah,
harangue.
yeah.
But you learned a lot about the planning board. and
We
Stuff
did,
you
I
didn't-
did, yes.
Stuff you never wanted to
That
know.
was educational.
How the sausage is made.
Being like,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when that sort of things happens and you haven't had a chance to respond, perhaps it's best to defer until the next meeting of the planning board.
We discussed that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's frustrating sometimes as a member of the planning board. We're precluded from even talking amongst ourselves outside of these meetings, which isn't any of our, preferred way of doing things. And it just never, even if it occurred to me, the only thing I could have done was to have said to someone at the code enforcement office, and, it's a very awkward situation.
yeah. I understand.
Apologies to the extent that.
My only comment, I guess, is that.
Please identify yourself.
Yes, Jeff Bally, a consultant to the applicant. My only comment, I guess, would be is that, again, most of the comments made by Acorn are clerical in nature and could be addressed as part of a final application
Okay,
submittal. There's no, for lack of a better word, red flags. There's no major technical issues that have been, it's why is this not reflected on a graph on 1.2? I mean, they are minor. I had a conversation with Werner this morning to inquire as to the status of the Acorn feedback, and he sent it right away. But it's been in the town's possession for approximately a week. So, again, to be penalized by an additional 2 weeks here for technical elements that, again, this isn't final, this is preliminary. The thought process would be that they would be addressed and a memo back to the town as part of the final application.
Well, one thing we can do is we can take a vote on whether to find the application complete, subject to answers to the questions that Acorn has raised. I mean, it's not just clerical. There are some things there on drainage and the time of drainage. And,
Already said it was.
I think you voted it complete last 2 weeks ago.
oh, we did,
approve it.
Yeah, we're at the public hearing.
We're at the public.
oh, we're at the public hearing,
Yeah, we're
okay.
at a continued public hearing.
And I'm hearing two things.
Continue. Well, we
Jeff
could
made the
finish
point
the
that
public
most
hearing
of
and
them
then
are
just
clerical,
make it
and,
final.
and
There's
if
no
you wanna go
reason we couldn't.
through and flag which one, I mean,
Well, yeah, we'd
but if
have
there's
to-
some that aren't, then
I get it.
what are we gonna do?
I understand.
It's a bad
It's
situation.
a bad
We've
situation.
already created it.
Yeah.
So what are our options, I guess, here? It's continue the public meeting. Is there another option that we have?
The only other option would be to just say to the developer that their preliminary is adequate and send them forth to produce a final one which answers, oh, by the way, all of
And
these
and
questions
answers the
really well.
questions.
Wouldn't you have to open a public hearing now?
We've,
Continue it,
we've already, it is already
already
continued.
continued.
We're in the midst right
Okay.
now of, we haven't actually opened it this time, but it was opened the last time.
if you opened it and there was no further comment,
No,
Could-
we,
reopened it,
if I could reopen it and then then the question would be,
if there were no further comment,
if there were no
Could you-
further
public
could you then
comments.
continue it to the second week with their final plan? And then,
Well, their final plan's a month after
well,
the,
is there enough information here right now, even with the Acorn comments, to approve the preliminary plan?
That's
Or
what,
is there enough substantive changes in there that we just can't?
So I'll just offer the comment that I didn't see anything in the report that would lead me to believe that you're gonna see any substantive change,
Okay,
to what you have here.
okay.
and we will get another crack at this.
We will submit a final
Correct.
the final version.
application that will incorporate our response to all of
You
the.
don't have a concern that, gee, the board should really hear our answer to this because we're worried about it for next time. I'm not hearing that at all. So,
I'm not, I don't, like Werner said, I agree with him. I don't see any red flags, and like I mentioned before, I don't see anything that's gonna change the design.
so I, for one, would like to, in any case, have the public meeting opened, so in case there's something that we need to hear and haven't heard, we'll hear it.
Certainly going to open the public hearing.
Right,
yes,
I
at
would
this
like to
point.
do
Why-
that.
Why don't we
And
do
then
that
if,
right now?
if there isn't any surprises and new materials,
Yep.
then unless the board has some pre-existing reason why they want something fixed before we say this is approved, I would be willing to approve it on the code enforcement office's somewhat cursory, but initial and educated look at it, the Acorn responses saying, yeah, there's nothing that worries us out here that can't be looked at during the final.
Okay. So let me, in that case, open the public hearing.
Thank you.
Reopen the public hearing, which was started last week. So, would you like to speak to it? Because I know you had mentioned it.
I just, yes, I have to up here.
Yeah, you do.
I just want to know where I go with my concerns. So I spoke to Werner and he said here. So my property is in a butter, and I know all this land very, very well because I've walked around it for 40 years. It's been empty. The water pours down, goes into an pond, we call it the ice pond. It's on my property and on my property now. And then it goes down into a pond that we made for irrigation because our wells got salty. So we got a lot of help from the government, from the state of Maine, helped us put in a pond. The pond is all, it's not a spring-fed pond. It's all
Surface?
water, surface water that comes down. So that's why I brought up about herbicides, pesticides, and all that kind of stuff. That goes into the soil, absolutely does. If it causes cancer or not, blah, blah, but I worry about that. So I just don't know where I get that kind of, and I don't know what kind of reassurance you can give me, truthfully.
Well, we can ask the applicant basically to restrict the use of pesticides and herbicides
And fertilizer,
in the
for that matter.
HOA, the homeowners association document, and we have on most subdivisions.
I don't think we have on this one yet.
Well, the recommendation's been made.
Oh,
Yes,
Hi there.
Hello.
Yeah, I think we spoke a little bit about it, and the applicant has agreed to include in the homeowners documents only the use of organic fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides.
And you will be providing the homeowners, if
With-
we were
with
to,
at final
they
approval.
will be in the final.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah. More and more of the subdivisions we're seeing have a lot of wetlands and wildlife areas as significant ones as we see here. And so we're looking very carefully to try to restrict things that are detrimental to the health of those areas.
What I'm understanding for the first time tonight is this idea that the runoff is currently being used to advantage for irrigation. And so to contaminate that source is an additional and compelling reason to be very careful about
And from what
what's done upstream.
I'm kind of a little late into thinking about, not thinking about it, I've been always thinking about it, but this project. I think from what I can see, most of the houses are farther away. It might not impact.
Yeah,
most
where
of
is your property on the map? I was trying to determine.
You show right here?
Yeah, up front.
I'm up. Yeah, well, I'm off Construction Road.
Up in that end. Okay, that's what I thought.
So,
So I thought that the watershed was,
so if I may, that there is sort of a split in watersheds on this parcel, and the proposed development, the proposed lots and the proposed road actually will drain south to Mills Road. It's Mills Road.
Yeah, it
So
goes
there's
to
no
Mills.
development in the area that drains up towards your
Towards where-
property.
Where all the open land is, right? at the
Exactly,
open land.
yeah.
'Cause, I mean, helpful, thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, any hands raised?
I'll just make one comment. You heard the last folks that were here, and thank you, and the conversation with, perhaps making it more dramatic on the HOA, that there'll be fines and penalties, and, things can result from not obeying
Yeah.
those rules,
I did hear that,
specifically on pesticides.
yes.
And,
So you.
I'll
just- you
relay
might
that to
consider
the applicant.
language.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and maybe that's something to talk about with the lawyer,
we
how that's handled.
will.
And we did handle it in the last one by the HOA can approve specific applications. So there's an out for somebody that has a real problem, like
Sure.
an elm tree that needs to be treated,
Sure.
something like that.
Understood. Great. We'll think very carefully about how that's worded and enforced.
Do just have one note, and I think we've talked about this before, but I want to make it clear to folks that, the town doesn't enforce HOA documents. So, those are guidance documents for the operation of the private development, but, even though those documents may show up as an exhibit, and those are an important piece of information for the board to look at, we don't enforce the provisions of.
That's
the
why I
HOA.
suggested there be some enforcement in it, such as a fine.
Not
All
coming
clear.
from the town.
But that's up to the HOA.
I'm just clarifying that it's not the
Right.
town that's
Yeah.
in the
No, it's
position
not.
of.
That is only the
Says
HOA
police.
that would levy
Except
fines.
that if the town restricted certain pesticide use within water bodies.
Doesn't though.
It doesn't, but if they decide in the future, because some of your committees are leaning that way, like they do in some towns, okay, then it would become an enforcement issue for the code enforcement officer,
Depending on how the ordinance is structured.
depending on how the ordinance is structured, so.
So
Chairman, Zoom attendee Bill has his hand raised.
All right. Why don't you, no, we have another attendee who wishes to speak.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes,
who is it?
Can you hear me?
we can.
Oh, good. Just to follow up, I'm Bill Casey, Unit C9 at the Resort at Goose Rocks, 272 Mills Road. And would the restriction on the use of herbicides and pesticides be something that can be included in the letter of findings? I think it was in the case of the Sandy Pines campground when their application was looked at some years ago.
It could be, but it's more appropriate here where this is a subdivision, that it be on the people who are going to be responsible for the property long-term, not the town.
Sure.
So I think putting it in the HOA document and adding the mechanism by which it's enforced into that document, again, to Werner's point, not the town and code enforcement office, but self-policed and subject to whatever. I think that'll be more effective than just saying it, oh, we found during the planning board said this is what you ought to do.
Well, it may or may not be more effective. When we do it with a single entity such as the Sandy Pines, then it becomes basically a code enforcement office issue, as we did then. Well, if we restricted it for a single household or single lot or Sandy Pines as we did, then it becomes your issue to be enforced.
I don't recall it being a condition on Sandy Pines.
Yeah, I don't recall the specifics
I don't
of that,
recall
but-
it in there, though.
I thought it was just in the findings.
So you can reference the HOA language in the finding of facts.
Yes, you
That
can.
was the way I was planning on doing it.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You had one more?
One more. Here you go.
Come on.
No, just quickly, I mean, I think.
You need to really speak to the
Oh,
microphone.
sorry.
Okay.
I think that without it becoming a town ordinance like in other towns, I work in other towns as well.
Sure.
And they just go ahead and do whatever they want to
Yep.
do. So it's almost unenforceable
Catch me if you can.
by the HM, the homeowners associations. It just, that's been my experience anyway. They're out there spraying everything. So it's just something to think about. I don't know I do know what I would like to see done, but I don't know how that will affect this right now.
We do have a town conservation committee,
Correct.
and you could talk to them. They have been drafting an ordinance to that effect for the town. Whether it will pass, I don't know. But you might want to consider consulting them and talking them, seeing where they're at this point.
And I have done that. I get, just as a quick point, when you talked about, saving an oak tree, or what did you use, a hemlock?
Elm.
Elm. If everybody did do this correctly and did not use all those things, then certainly you could target that. That's what IPM is supposed to be. That's not how it's used.
Yeah.
So that's just a comment that I have to make, and why it's important for us to go ahead and, I say, just outlaw the stuff and come up with some new rule that we can enforce.
Okay, that's not up to us.
Yeah, but within our remit as a planning board,
Right.
I think the best way that we can address it or handle it is to see that it put in to the HOA, reference that in the finding of facts.
Yep.
Right.
And then
We-
it's
we-
up to them going forward to do the enforcement until the town comes up with an ordinance or another way of handling it.
Yeah. Yeah, we have ordinances that allow us to look at effect on wildfowl and natural environments. And that's generally what we use to recommend restricting. But as for a town ordinance, you'd have to work with like the Conservation Committee, draft an ordinance and bring it before the Board of Selectmen, and then it would go for a town vote.
Yep,
So,
I'm trying.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, now, I think we're headed towards
Is any-
approving this.
yes.
And so the approving the preliminary plan. So I guess I'll take a motion to that.
I would like to propose to close the public.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, thank you. If we close the public, we'll first close the public hearing.
Right.
Now I will.
I'll make a motion to approve the preliminary plan.
Second.
Okay, let me start with Ed.
Yes.
Approve.
Approve?
Approve.
And Mike approves. Okay, now, what I need from you, Mike, is a letter, and I can send you a sample. Basically, the letter, we send a letter from the planning board saying, we have approved your preliminary plan. There is no finding of facts, it's just.
Yeah,
I gave him a couple of examples.
Okay, good. So just get me one of those examples, and I'll get it signed and sent out. And then they have a period of, I believe it's a month, before they can submit
Right.
the final. So,
All right, can do.
all right, thank you. Okay, well,
Thank
that
you all very
brings.
much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And, so anyhow, now we're to item 201, and some poor person has been here for an hour and 45 minutes.
Like,
Sitting in those hard blue chairs.
Sitting, yes.
So which one's this?
So please introduce yourself and discuss this lot smaller thing than the previous two, so.
I'm Josh Waterhouse, JW Group, owner of the parcel. We're just doing a basic lot split. We split off a home in, I think in 2018, and we owned a remainder 3.5 to 4 acre parcel of land that we're just getting approved for, to build a house on. Werner had recommended adding a turnaround approved by the fire department or recommended by the fire department for safety at the end of Roberts Lane. And so we're just looking for approval because in the approved plan, any further subdivision required us coming in front of the planning board.
So what you have here, and, you know, we've talked about this before, it's important for the board to consider, you know, what future issues or ramifications might come about in terms of how findings are written. In this case here, you know, the findings were written such that that the extension of Roberts was for a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so what you have here, again, it's not a subdivision per se, but it's the fact that, you know, the findings were done, you know, in such a fashion that Roberts was approved up to a certain point, and, you know, this is essentially for the extension of that.
So we're going from lot 2291 is being split into 2291 and 2291D. Is that correct?
Has been split, yes.
Has been split.
Yep.
So it isn't, it's just the road being extended, not a split.
Correct.
That's
Well,
what I thought.
what's in front of the board is just the extension.
I was gonna say, we
Of
don't
the-
care
of the
about the
road.
split.
Yeah,
Correct.
The
So then-
property's already been done.
That's right.
Okay. That's what I thought.
Do we have
Okay.
copies of the findings that have caused it to come before the board?
Yes, those are
Where?
available. Yep, they may not have been part of the application, but would have come from April.
Okay, so the deal is, if we go look at the previous findings, it says this road is approved for one building lot or up to a certain point, and if you want to do any more, you need to go back to the board? Does it really?
So what you have here, it says the applicant has requested access over Roberts Lane for the purposes of constructing a single-family home.
Okay,
You know, so you have your implication of singular lot here.
got it? You're reading the findings?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
right.
Good. And so we're being asked to say, okay, the road as is, for example,
As
is
proposed.
okay for 2 lots.
And as
Or-
provided on his proposed modification.
Including that, so is the road gonna meet the design standards for 2 lots, or is it gonna be wide enough for 3 or 4 lots?
Well,
for
it's
example.
it's at the end, you know, so Roberts, I mean, how many houses are on Roberts? There's probably,
I think it's, has 9 lots
Yeah.
roughly. There are a
Which have-
couple lots that aren't built
which
on.
have, I mean, if you went through the history of Roberts, there's probably 2 or 3 different approvals that it had gone through with the planning board, because you had different lot owners.
Yep,
Part of it was constructed prior to there being a site plan review for private roads. Then a second segment of it was done when that portion of the ordinance was created. And then I'll call this the third portion, was done in 2006.
Okay,
So, again, after the town had adopted a process for review and approval of private roads.
so if I look at the 2006 application and findings of fact, I'm gonna find that the road has been approved for the number of lots that were there then minus the one that's being added.
Right, yeah, I mean, it only addressed, it only addressed the portion that was in front of the board at the time.
Right. I'm trying to get at, what's our job here? Do we need to go back and say, and see more than that?
No, I don't think you need to go back and see more than that. What you have is you've got a modification of a previous approval.
Okay.
Yep.
Is the road compatible with the
Design standards.
with the
Yeah,
design
it's-
standard?
Yeah, it meets the width
Meets the width.
requirements. You've got a 50-foot wide right-of-way with the traveled, with the required traveled width there.
So we don't have to look at the criteria at all,
There's just this extension,
just the extension.
correct?
Yeah, I guess my only concern when I looked at it, there seems to be an incredibly sharp right turn in Roberts Lane.
Yes.
And could you get the fire truck around that corner to be able to use the hammerhead that they put in? And I here it's just, I think, the right-of-way marked out, but it is
Yeah.
better than a 90-degree turn. It's like.
It's more acute than that.
It's acute. And I'm like, well, it's really good you put a hammerhead up at the top, but you're can you even get the truck there to begin with? Which I wasn't sure if that would work. And then I couldn't really tell if the hammerhead fits in the right-of-way from the drawings. I didn't know if there needed to be any clearances or setbacks for that, but I figured that would be the fire chief telling us that.
Yeah, I mean, I would, what we're suggesting to folks is that whenever these, when these hammerheads are done, really what you have is you have a portion of it that constitutes part of the driveway for the house. And then you have, the other element of the hammerhead.
Well, the right-of-way seems to go through the lot, but the hammerhead is actually on the property, the private
The
property.
portion of,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's all right.
So the fire chief will have looked at this by the time
Well,
we're.
as we, the design is part of what has been approved by the chief.
He's already approved it.
So, no, so he hasn't specifically reviewed this, however, he's reviewed and approved the design of the hammerhead.
Okay, so he's approved the right-of-way, and he's approved a hammerhead that
No,
is
he's
in this
approved the
report.
design of the hammerhead, but typically, we go through this first meeting first, then solicit Chief Everett's
Okay.
Okay.
feedback.
Yeah, if it would be him, could they put a hammerhead in there that would be usable? Would be the first thing. Will that design actually fit in the right-of-way, which,
Is the proposed
Well,
implementation of the design agreeable with the fire chief? I think that's what
Dimensionally,
we're
it fits
asking.
because you've got the right-of-way width there.
Right.
and then the question, could he even get it up there by turning the corner?
I think that's a question worth asking.
Yeah, 'cause and it depends on.
Now, I
what
will
the
tell you that
clearance
that's on property not controlled by the applicant.
It's still, why bother with the hammerhead
that
if
was
you're
my
not ever
point.
gonna put the truck
is. Yeah,
up
if you can't get
there?
it up there, don't go through the cost of putting in a hammerhead.
That's a fair
I mean,
point, but,
That was kind of my point of why do
not within
something
our
just for the
purview.
sake of doing it.
yeah.
And honestly, I think we're very fortunate to have a fire chief who's
Reasonable.
so willing to work with the planning board and has been willing to work practical solutions with people all around the town. I think it's just marvelous, and I hope we're not abusing that privilege, but I think we'd be crazy
Yeah,
not to ask him to take a look. He's been so helpful along the way. It's like no good deed goes unpunished, right? He does his job so well that we're asking him another one.
yeah,
But this is a
But I
very
think
useful
they-
process.
yeah. Okay, is it needed, and if it's not needed, then the extension could be approved without the hammerhead, because it would never be used.
And he'd never, well, he might have another feeling about
How to do
what he wants you to do for a home on that lot,
Yeah.
that's all.
Yeah, so get his.
if he can't bring his fire truck up there.
From a practical perspective, I don't know that I've ever come across anyone in the fire service that would argue against having, more room to turn a vehicle around. But,
So don't ask it that way. Can he bring his equipment
but
to the property that's being proposed? I think it's that simple.
Yeah.
Given that you're going out of your way to fund and implement a hammerhead around the discussions that he's had to accommodate the new fire truck and all of that, but are you wasting your time?
Right, if you can't get around that angle, then we leave the lot to, whatever they want to do, that we don't need a hammerhead.
What's the mechanism for the applicant asking that question? Does he do it through you, or do you approach the fire chief yourself
we can provide this to the chief.
and ask that
Yeah.
question in a
Sure.
manner that doesn't get the response you just had? Well, of course we want more room. It's not the
We'll
question.
we'll coach
He
you on
doesn't-
how to
he
ask
doesn't
the
answer.
questions.
That's right, yep.
Okay, so,
But given that, I think this application, if we can get the copy of the findings
Yeah.
As well, the previous one, I think the application's complete. I would-
it's it to me.
Yeah.
So I would move to accept this application as complete, and
Okay.
I'd be willing to be the go-to person on it.
Oh, you want to be one of the case manager?
Sure.
Okay.
Unless you got someone else in mind, that's fine too. No big, I don't want to
Oh,
be
you're
parochial.
it.
Sounds like you have
You're
it
it.
written there.
You win. The,
A lottery, huh? All right.
yes. Okay, so,
I'll second that motion.
thank you. So I'll go this way. So,
You don't need anything else.
George,
Oh, yeah.
Chief.
Scott, Tom, that's good.
Approve.
Nina, and what's his name over there, Ed? Charlie. Okay, so, we'll have a,
Public hearing.
we'll have a public hearing on this
Okay.
next time, the 15th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thanks
And
for,
you're
thanks
gonna
for
bring it to
waiting
the fire chief
through the rest of it.
corner?
The first meeting was.
That's fine, yeah.
He said, anything else, yeah.
Okay, which brings us to
Finding of facts.
Woodland Drive.
item 221-201 Woodland Drive, the findings of fact. So
Oh, we're not doing this in like 45.
I'm going to read the findings of fact. If you guys want to start signing it, you can. Kennebunkport Planning Board, findings of fact and decision, application for final subdivision amendment, Lot D, Woodland Drive, Kennebunkport, Maine, 04046, and to subdivide Lot D. Following a review pursuant to the Kennebunkport subdivision regs and land use ordinance on February 1st and a public hearing on February 15th, 2023, the Kennebunk Plan Board makes the following findings of fact and conclusion and renders the following decisions subject to conditions outlined below. I'll summarize below. Findings of fact are as followed. Owner is BCD Woodland LLC, 21 Cornfield Post, Yarmouth, Maine, 04096. Applicant is Duncan McDougall. Coastal Creations of Maine, 21 White Pond Road, Standish, Maine, 04084. In a letter of authorization dated 1 April 2022, owner authorized applicant as agent on behalf of the owners in this manner. Property is identified as map 8, block 3, lot 29 in the municipal tax assessor's map. The application seeks an amendment to prior subdivision plan named Kennebunkport Seashore Company, which was approved on June 25th, 1980, and the approved plan is recorded in the York County Registry of Deeds as Plan Book 110, page 3. 6, the owner has demonstrated a legal interest in the property by providing a copy of the warranty deed recorded in the York County Registry of Deeds, Book 18972, pages 774 to 776. 7, the property is comprised of 9.74 acres, more or less, in a final application dated November 28th, 2022. The applicant proposes to divide the property into 2 lots, 5.37 acres and 4.37 acres, more or less respectively. 8, Planning Board approved waivers to the following requirements of the subdivision regulations. A, 415-72D10, high-intensity soil survey. B, 415-72D14, tree survey. C, 415-72D24, traffic study. And D, 415-72D26, stormwater management plan. Applicant. 9, the applicant proposes to upgrade and fully pave existing Woodland Drive to a width of 20 feet with a hammerhead turnaround. In letters dated 9/15 and 22 and 10/17/22, the fire chief stated the road should be 20 feet wide if more than 2 houses are eventually to be built. He also agreed upon the dimensions of the hammerhead turnaround. 11, there are no historic sites affected in this undertaking. 12, the lots will be served by private individual wells and septic tanks. 13, houses will be required to have individual fire suppression systems. 14, estimated cost of private road improvement is $300,000. 15, homeowners on the road are responsible for upkeep and plowing of the road via a road management or homeowners agreement. Conclusion. In accordance with Articles 7, 8, and 9 of the Town of Kennebunkport subdivision regulations and Title 30A MRSA 4404, the Planning Board grants approval of the applicant's final subdivision plan amendment of Lot D Woodland Road application. Decision. 1, the final subdivision amendment application identified as hereby approved. 1, the approval must be recorded with the Registry of Deeds within 90 days of approval, or it becomes null and void unless an extension is granted by the board in writing. 2, the applicant will comply with all terms and conditions of the Town of Kennebunkport ordinances and subdivision regulations and all applicable federal and state regulations and approvals, as well as those specified in the final application, all of which are incorporated herein by reference. Dated 1 March 2023, Kennebunkport Planning Board. So, need a motion?
I make a motion to approve the findings of fact.
I'll second that.
Okay, well, Ed,
Approve?
Nina,
Approve.
Tom, approve?
Approve.
Approved.
Okay. And so
That's one.
this one's fully signed, I think.
Yeah, we're just waiting for.
Mr.
So
Chairman?
yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Well, as soon as you sign the rest, the second copy. I'll accept that as soon as it makes it down to Mike. How's that?
I'll second that motion as soon as you signed everything.
I'm a slow writer right now.
Oh, okay.
There's another one down there.
Oh, thanks, Tom, yeah.
So the letter goes to Warner, or what do I do?
No, so,
Letterhead.
the letter really just goes to it goes to the applicant.
Right, but when I draft it up and it needs to go on letterhead, where does it go?
Send it
Goes to me.
Yep,
Okay.
And I give it
yeah, it goes to April then.
to April.
Yeah.
April types it with me signing it.
Does it go under your signature, Tom,
Yeah, usually.
as the chair?
Mine or
So you're drafting it for Tom's signature?
Right, okay. I
either
can draft for.
mine or Nina's.
There's a motion on the floor.
Yes, there is a motion on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Now, Nina.
So I draft for Tom by way of April.
I am.
Oh,
I will be March 15th and April 17th, I think. So,
March 15,
whatever the April one is. So,
the Ides of March?
So,
the Ides of March, yes.
just to let the board know, so the plans for, the findings that you just read, so those, we'll let you know when those plans are available in the office to get signed,
Oh, okay.
so.
April
Yeah.
17th?
Whatever the Wednesday is, yeah, it might be, it's probably 18th.
Okay,
Yeah, we're going to,
okay.
the second one's our UK cruise. The first one is our, visiting my grandsons during school vacation.
Oh, yeah, stop.
Oh, I'd love to go back to the UK. I love the UK. I want to go back to school.